Blum on Obama.
It is a great honor and pleasure to welcome you to the CIA. Mr. President, it is a great honor and pleasure in the shadows of secrecy.
How does the CIA do it? How does the CIA do it? Penetrates a country that's run by a leader that they don't like.
Well, the CIA's secret weapon is a thing called money. 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 Have unlimited amounts of it. And you can buy anyone's cooperation almost. You can buy anyone's silence.
Crimes of the state, clandestine arm, the CIA, rogue state, the U.S. installing a dictator, overthrowing a democracy.
There haven't been too many empires in history. We're one of that. We're one of that. Most powerful one in the world. Now, with every passing day, it's more and more obvious that the foreign policies of Bush and Obama are indistinguishable. Obama, he loves the empire.
Let me share with you just a few thoughts about the situation in which we find ourselves. Potentially we've made some mistakes. That's how we learn. We live in dangerous times.
Extra cover.
So you are an indispensable tool. I understand that it's hard when you are asked to protect the American people against people who have no scruples and would willingly and gladly kill innocents.
American military intervention.
Extra cover.
That's what makes us different. What makes the United States special. The CIA is unique, and that's okay, because we're on the better side of history.
This may sound harsh, but I'm come to this point of view. I don't think Obama believes in anything much at all. Any talk he gives, it has the same vacuousness to it. His talks are just without substance. They're full of cliches and platitudes. And he can impress many people.
Yeah, of course.
Who are desperate for a real leader that they can believe in.
I believe that the CIA's best days are still yet to come. Why we can take such extraordinary pride in being Americans.
Well, his policies become exposed as not being different from Bush's, I think his support will slowly ebb. I think you're watching polls and you'll see them reflected.
Shut it down.
CIA.
Shut it down.
CIA.
It is time to shut down this terrorist organization. Shut it down.
CIA.
Shut it down.
CIA.
It is time to shut down this terrorist organization. Shut it down, Attorney General Holder.
CIA officers are spread out across the globe. Narcotics trafficking and espionage.
And also, what is really lacking always for us is we don't give the motivation of why they want to do us harm. What is the motivation?
Unfortunately, Al-Qaeda has perverted Islam and has corrupted the concept of Islam so that he's able to attract these individuals. But Al-Qaeda has the agenda of destruction and death.
Saying it's because of religion.
I'm saying it's because of an Al-Qaeda organization that uses the banner of religion in a very perverse and corrupt way.
Why?
This is a long issue, but Al-Qaeda is just determined to carry out attacks here against Iran.
But you haven't explained why.
I understand that. I watch the cable shows once in a while.
So that is an important one. That is Barack Obama, my take on him. So, Blum on Obama. Who is William Blum? William Blum is an American author, historian, and critic of United States foreign policy. He worked in a computer-related position in the United States Department of State in the mid-1960s. Initially an anti-communist with dreams of becoming a foreign service officer, he became disillusioned by the Vietnam War. He lives in Washington, D.C., age 85. In early 2006, Blum briefly became the subject of widespread media attention when Osama bin Laden issued a public statement in which he quoted Blum and recommended that all Americans read Rogue State, A Guide to the World's Only Superpower. As a result of this mention, sales of his book greatly increased. I was quite surprised and even shocked and amused when I found out what he said. I was glad. I knew it would help the book sales. I was not bothered by who it was coming from. If he shares with me a deep dislike for certain aspects of U.S. foreign policy, then I'm not going to spurn any endorsement of the book by him. I think it's good he shares those views, and I'm not turned off by that. It's almost as good as being on the Oprah Book Club. Since the bin Laden recommendation, in 2006, he said he had not been offered a single speaking engagement on any campus. This despite January to May normally being the most active period for him and other campus speakers. So he has 86, The CIA, A Forgotten History. 2000, Rogue State, A Guide to the World's Only Superpower. 2002, West Bloc Dissident, A Cold War Memoir. 2003, Killing Hope. This is the one that I bought. This is how I learned about him. Killing Hope, U.S. Military and CIA Intervention Since World War II. 2004, Freeing the World to Death, Essays on American Empire. And 2013, America's Deadliest Export, Democracy, The Truth About U.S. Foreign Policy, and Everything Else. William Blum. And I signed up for his newsletter, the Blum Report. Let's read the last Blum Report. Gmail, access. Just 1 second, technical difficulties. Gmail, access. 1 moment, technical difficulties. Gmail, access. Alright, now let me search for him. Blum. Gmail, access. Searching. Okay. William Blum and the Anti-Empire Report. Thursday, October 25th. I am writing to you in place of William Blum. I'm his wife, his friend, his ex-wife, and the mother of his son, who lives in Germany. He will not be able to write his Anti-Empire Report. He had a very bad fall in his apartment. There he lay for many hours, maybe up to 2 days, unable to move, until a friend found him. He was taken to ICU. He's no longer in critical condition, but he is still confused, extremely weak, and can't move his right arm. He has been in the hospital for more than 2 weeks now, and it is impossible to say how much longer he has to stay there, and he will certainly need long-term care. As you may guess, he does not have the best of insurances, which means he needs your help. If you wish, you can donate to Bill using the button below. Aldehyde Zeufel, literary translator, Freiburg, Germany, and her email. If you ordered any of William's books recently, we'll try to find another way to send it to you, but unfortunately, it may take a while. So, I signed up for his Anti-Empire Report for the last 10 years or so, maybe more than that, since I bought that book, Killing Hope. And I've read them, and recently I started reading them again when I got back into politics and started questioning the world again, as opposed to just living a comfortable life. The last one I got was the Anti-Empire Report, number 160. William Blum takes on the Washington Post again in the person of columnist Max Boot, formerly of the Wall Street Journal. Dear Mr. Boot, you write every administration since Franklin D. Roosevelt's has tried to improve relations with Moscow. I stopped, frozen. Can the man be serious? Yes, he can. God help us. I've published 5 books, this is William Blum writing, which give the lie to the statement, detailing all the foreign governments the U.S. has overthrown, or tried to, because they were too friendly with Moscow, or were themselves too communist, or too socialist, or simply too liberal. China, France, Italy, Greece, Korea, Albania, Iran, Guatemala, Costa Rica, Indonesia, Haiti, British Guiana, Iraq, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Congo, Brazil, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Ghana, Uruguay, Chile, Bolivia, Australia, Portugal, East Timor, Angola, Jamaica, Nicaragua, Philippines, Grenada, Suriname, Libya, Panama, and I'm only up to 1989. God help us. Read my books. William Blum. The reply from Mr. Boot, who is the Washington Post columnist, formerly of the Wall Street Journal. The reply from Mr. Boot. How does your email contradict my statement? I didn't say the U.S. hadn't tried to oppose the Soviet Union and communism. I said that every president had also tried to improve relations with Moscow. The reply from Mr. Blum. So overthrowing governments and assassinating their leaders because they're friendly to the Soviet Union is not a contradiction to trying to improve relations with the Soviet Union. Interesting. The CIA also connived to get Soviet diplomats expelled from various countries and did various things to block Soviet international financial transactions, etc., etc. All signs of trying to improve relations with Moscow? Silly me for not thinking of that. I'll have to revise my books. No reply received. This is William Blum now in his anti-empire report. The last one he sent out before he had that fall. He's 85. And he fell down and he might not be doing this work anymore. And this is one of the reasons why. At the beginning of the year, I felt compelled to get back to what I was doing. You could call it life calling or just my own personal trying to construct a narrative of the truth that fits objective reality as opposed to the stories that seem just to pervade all aspects of our being, from our pop culture to what I was in the military, my job. All of your socialization gets you to buy into the American empire and its assumptions. There are alternatives out there, people who are trying to figure out objective truth. William Blum, I feel, is one of them, and I've listened to him for over 10 years. Doesn't feel like he has an axe to grind. People get emotional when they talk about this stuff. I got emotional yesterday when I was talking about the sound bombing and Fred Hampton and stuff, but there is a thread we're trying to connect, which is related to objective reality. And as we ignore that more and more, that's where the stress in society comes from. You don't understand the feedback loop into terrorism or into the apathy of the youth, the feeling like you don't have a choice. Because this society, in order to maintain its lies, has to get more and more coercive, especially since the individual with technology now on the internet has more and more freedom. We're going to need more and more methods of inducement and censorship. So William Blum says in his last Empire report before he had his fall, and it sounds like he's not doing the good work anymore. The above is one example of how conservatives rationalize their being cold warriors. The United States always meant well. No matter how bad their foreign interventions may have looked, America's heart was always in the right place. The current U.S. Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, recently stated, "We are the good guys. We're not the perfect guys, but we are the good guys. And we're doing what we can." I think that Mattis was also the guy who says, "I love a brawl." And about Iraq. Mattis has a history of saying shitty things. And if I say that Mattis is wrong there, that we're not the good guys, what does that mean? I think there's a way to articulate this without opposing the troops, but painting them as victims. Also the civilians. If we look for the war profiteers, the people who are making money off the American empire. It's not going to our roads and infrastructure. It's not like we're seeking spoils and dividing them out person by person throughout our country. $6 trillion came out of our treasury in order to go towards these wars, or is coming out. The cost of George Bush Jr.'s wars of aggression, voluntary wars of aggression. So we're getting screwed not just as much as our victims, because our victims are losing their lives. We're just losing our livelihood. But to be a poor American is still probably better than to be on the receiving end of our military. Russian interference in the U.S. election, the new Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. The Washington Post has a regular fact checker, Glenn Kelsler, who checks the accuracy of statements made by politicians and other public figures. On September 3rd, he announced that President Trump's first 592 days in office have produced 4,713 false or misleading claims. That's about 8 per day. The article included a list of the types of claims, including the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, and whether people in the Trump campaign were in any way connected to it. Kessler believes that they were. All told, more than 200 times the president has made claims suggesting the Russian probe is made up, a hoax or a fraud. The fact checker needs to be fact checked. He takes as gospel that Russia consciously and purposefully interfered in the election, but like all the many other commenters, offers no evidence. It's conceivable that evidence of such has actually been presented, and I was in a coma that day. Would I remember that I was in a coma? Probably only if someone told me. So far, no one told me that I was in a coma. Keep in mind that a statement from the CIA that Russia interfered in the election does not count as evidence. It's merely a statement. Keep in mind that a statement from the FBI that Russia interfered in the election does not count as evidence. It's merely a statement. Keep in mind that a statement from the NSA that Russia interfered in the election does not count as evidence. It's merely a statement. Keep in mind that a statement from a dozen other U.S. intelligence agencies that Russia interfered in the election does not count as evidence. It's merely a statement. Here's James Clapper, former Director of National Intelligence. To me, it stretches credulity to think that Russians didn't have a profound impact on the outcome of the election. Clearly, if the man had any evidence to substantiate a statement, he would have provided it at the time. He did not provide any. So all we get is another statement. There are not many government bureaucrats who would publicly contradict the CIA, the FBI, the NSA on an important intelligence matter. How impressed would you be if a dozen Russian intelligence agencies all declared that Russia did not interfere in any way with the U.S. 2016 election? Moreover, keep in mind that numerous notices and advertisements posted to Facebook and other social media calling for the election of Trump and our defeat of Clinton do not count as evidence of Russia interfering in the election, even if some or most of the postings were seemingly made by Russians. Countless other notices and advertisements call for the election of Clinton and or the defeat of Trump. Moreover, many of these social media postings, which members of Congress and the media like to make so much of, were posted well before the candidates were chosen, or even after the election took place. So what do we make of all this? Well, it's been pointed out that most of these postings were so-called clickbait internet sites that earn payments based on their traffic volume. I have not come across any other explanation of the huge number of electoral postings during 2014 to 17. And forget about Trump aides like Paul Manafort and his partner Rick Gates, who've been charged with various financial crimes such as money laundering, tax and bank fraud, failure to register as lobbyists, and more. In part, the charges involve Ukraine, but nothing to do with Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. election, although their cases have undoubtedly fed that story. The idea of Russia interference in the U.S. elections has been repeated so many times in so many places, it's now taken as unquestioned history. Guardian reporter Luke Harding had a book out called Collusion, Secret Meetings, Dirty Money, and How Russia Helped Donald Trump Win, which reinforces this myth, and wouldn't be worth mentioning except that Harding was interviewed by that rare breed of skeptical journalist, Aaron Mate. Harding repeats one anti-Russian cliche after another, but Mate refuses to allow him to get away with any. It's indeed refreshing. Have a look. We'll look in a minute. Even if you assume that all the charges made about Russia interference in the election were true and put them all together, they still wouldn't have a fraction of the impact on the 2016 election, as did Republicans in several states by disenfranchising likely Democratic voters, blacks, poor students, people in large Democratic districts, by purging state voting lists. Noam Chomsky has pointed out that Israeli intervention in U.S. elections vastly overwhelms anything Russia has done. Israeli leader Netanyahu goes directly to speak to Congress without even consulting the president. The United States joined a grand alliance with the forces of the communist Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin in World War II. But Washington can't even talk civilly now with capitalist Russia. When your goal is world domination, any country that stands in the way of that is an enemy. American conservatives in particular have a most difficult time shaking this mind state. Here's a prominent conservative host of National Public Radio, Cokie Roberts, bemoaning Trump's supposed desire to develop friendly relations with Russia, saying, "This country has had a consistent policy for 70 years towards the Soviet Union and Russia, and Trump is trying to undo that." If Trump were to establish good relations with Russia, the lack of a European enemy would also leave NATO, the US, even more obviously unnecessary. Then we have the Skripal poisoning cases allegedly carried out by Russia and the UK. There are just two things missing to support this allegation: any verifiable evidence at all, and any plausible motive for the Russian government to have carried out such a crime. But stay tuned, the Brits may yet find Vladimir Putin's passport at the scene of the crime. Lest we forget one of Washington's greatest crimes, the world will long remember the present immigration crisis in Europe, which has negatively affected countless people there and almost all countries. History will certainly record it as a major tragedy. Could it have been averted or kept within much more reasonable humane bounds? After the United States and NATO began to bomb Libya in March 2011, almost daily for more than 6 months, to overthrow the government of Muammar Gaddafi with the completely phony excuse that Gaddafi was about to invade Benghazi, the Libyan center of his opponents, and so the United States and NATO were thus saving the people of that city from a massacre. The Libyan leader declared, "Now listen, you people of NATO, you're bombing a wall which stood in the way of African migration to Europe and in the way of Al-Qaeda terrorists. This wall was Libya. You're breaking it. You're idiots, and you will burn in hell for thousands of migrants from Africa." Remember also that Libya was a secular society like Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, all destroyed by America while supporting Saudi Arabia and various factions of Al-Qaeda. It's these countries that have principally overrun Europe with refugees. Gaddafi, like Saddam Hussein, had a tyrant side to him, but could in important ways be benevolent and do very valuable things. He, for example, founded the African Union and gave the Libyan people the highest standard of living in all of Africa. They had not only free education and healthcare, but all kinds of other benefits other Africans can only dream about. But Muammar Gaddafi was never a properly obedient client of Washington. Amongst other shortcomings, the man threatened to replace the US dollar with gold for payment of oil transactions and create a common African currency. He was, moreover, a strong supporter of the Palestinians and foe of Israel. In 2011, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was a prime moving force behind the United States and NATO turning Libya into a failed state, where it remains today. The attack against Libya was one that the New York Times said Clinton had championed, convincing President Obama in what was arguably her moment of greatest influence as Secretary of State. The American people and the American media, of course, swallowed the phony story fed to them, though no evidence of the alleged impending massacre has ever been presented. The nearest thing to an official U.S. government account of the matter, a Congressional Research Service report on events in Libya for the period, make no mention at all of the threatened massacre. Keep this in mind while reading the latest accusations against Russia. The U.S.-NATO heavy bombing of Libya also led also to the widespread dispersal through North African and Middle East hotspots of the gigantic arsenal of weaponry that Gaddafi had accumulated. Libya is now a haven for terrorists, from Al-Qaeda to ISIS, whereas Gaddafi had been a leading foe of terrorists. And oh my God, I've been called an anti-Semite. British Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and many others in the UK and the US are attacked for being anti-Semitic if they criticize Israel. But John McCain had very friendly meetings and posed for photos with prominent neo-Nazis in Ukraine and the Middle East, without being accused of being anti-Semitic. People involved in political activity on the left have to learn to ignore charges of anti-Semitism stemming from the criticism of Israel. These accusations are just thrown out as a tactic to gain political advantage, like with anti-American and conspiracy theorists, and do not deserve to be taken seriously. Whenever possible, such name-calling should be made fun of. There's an unwritten rule in right-wing circles. It's okay to be anti-Semitic as long as you're pro-Israel. Evangelical preacher Pat Robertson is such an example. While in the past an anti-Semite was someone who hates Jews, nowadays it's the other way around. An anti-Semite is someone the Jews hate. God appointed America to save the world in any way that suits America. God appointed Israel to be the nexus of America's Middle Eastern policy. And anyone who wants to mess with that idea is anti-Semitic, anti-American, with the enemy, and a terrorist. That's John Le Carre. George Bush, I don't even know if that guy's being sarcastic. George Bush Sr.'s Secretary of State, who is John Le Carre? Is that the novelist? Because you wonder how these, I'm talking about William Blum, who I quoted him, and everyone knows who Barack Obama is, but not many people know who William Blum is. And he's in that, I've been listening to these anti-empire reports for years now. So I found a speech of his, and I contrasted that against Barack Obama to try to regain my sanity and objectivity in this crazy world of misinformation. Following the success of his early novels, he left the MI6 to become, this is John Le Carre, a full-time author. Several of his books have been adapted for film and television. In 2011, he was awarded the Goethe Medal. What books did he write? Did he write 007? He wrote Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. So, all the spy novels, he's a spy novelist. He wasn't a James Bond guy, he was another guy. So he wasn't being sarcastic. He actually said, God appointed America to save the world. Uh-oh, what's going on? Yeah. George Bush Sr. Secretary of State James Baker famously said to a colleague, "Fuck the Jews. They don't vote for us anyways." Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor under Jimmy Carter. An anti-Israeli Israel bias is not the same as anti-Semitism. To argue as much as to claim an altogether unique immunity for Israel, untouchable by any kind of criticism that is normally directed at the conduct of states. What the man actually believes about his presidency. He keeps bragging about how he forced NATO to collect more money from members other than the United States. Here he is on the phone conversation with Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. You do know I'm doing a great job for the country. You do know that NATO is now going to pay billions and billions of dollars more, as an example that anyone thought possible, that other presidents were unable to get. So it's a tremendous amount of money. No other president has done it. It was headed down the opposite direction. Woodward said nothing to the contradict Lord Trump. Someone other than the Post Star reporter might have pointed out that giving NATO billions more is not necessarily a good thing, that the member countries might have spent their money on health, education, environment, etc., for their own people, instead of more planes, bombs, and tanks. If not that very moment on the phone, Woodward or the Post could at least have mentioned this subsequently in print. So, it's William Blum. He writes these anti-empire reports, and what I find interesting, I find a lot of things interesting, but it's tough. And that was his last one, and now he fell downstairs, and he probably won't be doing that anymore. Well, and then there's Killing Hope, the CIA. U.S. military and CIA intervention since World War II is a history book on covert CIA operations. Let me just do an Amazon Killing Hope review, because I was going to read the Wikipedia, but maybe we can get a Cliff Notes version. Here we go. This is why Amazon took off, because of the review sections. And they're fucking up their website now. A devastating attack, this is the top review, a devastating attack on America's actual foreign policies, as opposed to the propaganda fed to children in school and to adults from the government and mainstream media. We all want to believe that our country stands for freedom and human rights, but sadly the record doesn't support that idea. As New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison said in 1967, our government is the CIA and the Pentagon, with Congress reduced to a debating society. We won't build dachas and Auschwitzes. A clever manipulation of the mass media is creating a concentration camp of the mind that promises to be far more effective in keeping the populace in line. I've learned enough about the machinations of the CIA in the past year to know that there's no longer the dream world America, that this is no longer the dream world America I once believed in. Huey Long once said, fascism will come to America in the name of anti-fascism. I'm afraid, based on my own experience, that fascism will come to America in the name of national security. Blum points out how useless popular encyclopedias Americana, Britannica, Collier's are when it comes to documenting the history of U.S. interventions abroad. The mainstream media doesn't need marching orders from the government, for the simple truth is that these individuals would not have reached the positions they occupy if they themselves had not all been guided through the same tunnel of camouflage history and emerged with the same selective memories and conventional wisdom. So that's the top review in 2013 for his book. So I keep William Blum in my intellectual life because I think he's close to objective reality. And then this year I was looking at my life and realizing that I was starting to stray away from that. And that's kind of scary. So doing psychedelics, doing other things. Well, I'm reviewing my life from back then forward, but I didn't do as many mushrooms back then. In my 30s is when I really started the mushroom practice. But hold up, I want to put that quote somewhere. I just copied it, and now I want to put it somewhere. Oh, fuck it. I have it here. That's what this is. That's why I'm recording everything. But this is the feeling you get. So now I'm putting together these music with these speeches because this, what the quote I just said, and Chomsky says this. I'm trying not to get upset at people just because they're not saying things in the way I say them, especially if they're views I've incorporated into my views. So they've obviously helped me develop my opinions. But that's why we do stuff like this, to reflect on our mental and emotional state, and I can learn from this. And I'm going to review these videos. But yeah, so we'll see in a year if I remember that quote that I just said. Who was that? That was New Orleans District Attorney General. How many people, bureaucrats or public intellectuals, have an objective view of the world, and how many of them, in order to reach the position that they're at right now, had to be indoctrinated to the point that, yeah, we know that this can happen. We know that people following Hitler's orders thought that they were doing the right thing. That's what I thought when I got into Jordan Peterson. He was all about, because supposedly he's into exploring how people can become fascist, totalitarian. And then he just rants about communism, and not theoretically to explain Marx's socialist communist ideology and then discredit it as a professor word, but he makes emotional arguments and generalities, and he doesn't get substance. He's a bullshitter. He's a fucking snake oil salesman, and I didn't notice until I looked into him. So anyone could get fooled by this. Yeah, and I noticed at the end of 2017, I was starting to look at those Biden-Obama memes and being like, that's kind of funny. I was deep into my Reddit addiction. I'm still coming out. I'm going to cure myself of that by creating alternative social media. But the issue is that you see so much good information. I just got a good resource from them this morning that I feel like without checking in on them, I'm missing out. But I also know I'm hurting myself because like when I was doing the Craig Hunters thing and I said that I could have stayed on that track, I think I have a knack for culture and branding. I don't have the skill set for programming or that. So I know a little bit, but I think I could understand industry. So I could do the top-down approach. And my roommate told me once, I was telling him about my my startup ambitions, and he said, you should just find a technical co-founder. So there's a way for me to get these ideas out there. I bring that up because with Reddit, that founder he's morally devoid of principle. He's not the person, he doesn't deserve the success he has. And you can say, well, maybe he does just because he has that success. But he doesn't have the same values as the internet. And that is why well, you know, without being negative, because again, you don't want to be negative, but I feel I would love to compete against him in his sphere. That's what it is. I'm looking for the Bluetooth other devices. I'm looking for a way to unplug anyways, I could do this later. Yeah, so oh, here we go, I found it. I have my my little Samsung guy in, and here we go. This guy. My way that I record all my conversations to make sure. Why do I do that? I do that, well, this is all back to that objective reality idea. There is this derealization. I like that term because it really helps me synthesize psychedelics and propaganda. What is propaganda but molding your mind, and what are psychedelics but questioning what's in your mind? And so that's why do empires try to regulate why try to control psychedelic substances? Because they don't want you questioning what's in your mind, because a lot of that stuff was put in there from early indoctrination. You have kids saluting the flag. The first Pledge of Allegiance wasn't over your heart. It was a salute. Trump at his rallies, he would ask people to pledge to vote for him. All fascist authoritarian behavior has very similar ways of expressing itself. And it's on the left and it's on the right. It's this Americanism, this rabid. I'm relating it now in my writing to a religion. You're dealing with people who've been indoctrinated into a cult, the cult of Americanism, committing these genocides. What did he say? How many countries? I read William Blum's thing. How many countries did he list off? He was only up to 1989. And then I want to pull that up again. Did I close that? He did 2 emails with that guy. So the one before that, 159, that was the same guy. And then I looked up that guy. Dear Mr. Birnbaum, you write Trump made no mention of Russia's adventures in Ukraine. Well, neither he nor Putin nor you made any mentions of America's adventures in the Ukraine, which resulted in the overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014, which led to the justified Russian adventure. Therefore, if Russia overthrew the Mexican government, would you blame the U.S. for taking some action in Mexico? Think about where the Ukraine is and where the U.S. is. I saw, I think it was Oliver Stone had a 4-hour interview with Russia. And Putin is very clear about their defensive posturing. And there's a little bit of belligerence that comes from him, but it seems like this person and this nation is just acting in their self-interest to create a buffer zone. We have many times, we've stated this openly, that the Western Hemisphere and the Americas are our sphere of influence, and when people come over here. But during our Civil War, we had the British in our north in Canada and the French in our south in Mexico ready to invade us. So this is how the game of diplomacy and war on international stages played out. When you sense weakness, you come right up to someone's border. But NATO and our posturing geopolitically is right up to Russia's border. Without stating that, it makes Russia look like the belligerent party. But you have to first ignore the guns we have pointed at their head. Even the way we learned the Bay of Pigs in school and high school, they did admit that we had missiles that we withdrew out of Hungary or something, but they withdrew their missiles from Cuba. But that was a response to us having missiles on Russia's border. So they acknowledged when I was in high school that was not pure Russian belligerence. But now, I guess, so when you're really close to the time in history, as time goes, they can be more objective. But right now, no one seems to be acting objective. That NATO and we were, if you look at all the states in between NATO and Russia, there's buffer states, and it seems like that antagonizes Russia when we push NATO right up to their border. Some people might say, well, it's insane, we're not going to invade Russia. There's plans on the table to invade Russia, and there's people in Trump's cabinet who have stated that we might do that in the near future. If you talk to people stationed in Germany in the military, they say that most of their training and exercises are non-Russian enemies, enemies that have Russian-type writing, Russian-type equipment. So they joke around, they say, oh, these are non-Russians. But basically, like, our military has been practicing war with Russia for, the last 10, 20 years. These military guys talk about it. So I wanted to look up this guy real quick because that's what I was interested in. This is me, I'm 36. This is me 26, 28. I'm trying to pinpoint exactly how much I was being socialized and how much I was not. How much of that is my own personal growth, trying to figure out how to be a man and have honor and wisdom and character. Some of that I learned from my parents and the men in my life, but some of that I have to figure out on my own because they have their own blind spots. So how much of my development is my personal growth and how much of it is me recognizing that this is a toxic bullshit environment around me because I've been in the military now. I'm reading a lot more than the average person, sometimes just dedicating times in my life just to read. And then creating the art to try to heal myself and not be too emotional, but feel like, all right, well. And then going into the Western Canada, I'm trying to put my feet under me, culturally, not just intellectually. That I don't just, because that's where the emotions overtake you, is when you're like, fuck, am I the only person who's seeing this? So you want to like chill out and be like, all right, even if everything is super deceptive, there have to be other people out there, not just me, who are seeing this. And so William Blum's a breath of fresh air. So how much of it is a choice of me not be indoctrinated, and how much of it is just me personal growth and what people blame on like Asperger's or whatever, but like I acknowledge that I can be a little unique and talkative and in my own head, so I force myself to socialize, forcing myself to get a girlfriend, forcing myself to burrow out. That's what, when I go across country and I get picked up randomly from a guy and then crash with him and drink beers with him, when I go out into the wild and run across people who validate my socialization, that like I'm a decent human being and they are too. And if like just the Tinder thing recently, I guess that's what it was. Just go out there and hang out with a random stranger and just drinking beers with illegal immigrants, with my broken Spanish in downtown LA. And just like, I bought the beers, they went and got tacos from some place that was closing down who they said they had the connection with, and we were just on the curb drinking beer, talking. Just humans are humans. When I went to Puerto Rico, I used that same skill set. When I was in sales, I used the same skill set. The more you work on your character, and the more you travel and meet other people, the better you are at making friends and socializing, guy or girl or whatever. So, but that's just human stuff. And now I have to deal with the situation into which I was born. That this country would send me to die for lies, and then, so this guy didn't live like me, Mr. Birnbaum, that William Blum, right before he fell down those stairs tragically. What is his, Michael Birnbaum. I looked him up. I was like, he's not questioning the narrative. But that's the thing that I'm coming to this year, is I used to think people were a lot more malicious. And as I get into Taoism and Zen Buddhism and psychology and morality, not as a professional, but just as a practitioner, as a hobby focus, I start to realize how large, as I explore my blind spots, now I feel like, I think that's the issue with trying to be virtuous, is you don't want to be unjust, and so you move methodically. But once I do this, I'm going to really pay more attention to other people's blind spots. So when they talk to me, I'm like, it makes more sense. I would think that someone like Michael Birnbaum in the past was just like, all these guys are duplicitous, Washington Post, I think, assholes. But and Barack Obama too might just be a shitty broker. That's what I'm sort of leaning to. The guy doesn't even know what's going on, Barack Obama. Like that, what William Blum just said, Hillary Clinton convinced him of that. And who convinced Hillary Clinton to go into Libya? These people have just a very narrow view of the world in which American can do no wrong, and American interests are corporate interests. And it's a suicide. And then what gave me the confidence to really solidify that theory this year was like in September, I came across Toynbee, um, the um, the guy who studied histories, and he studied 26 civilizations. And he has this great, like from the 60s, he did it for like 4 decades studying civilizations. And his theory really fits this objective framework I've been working on that explains all the bullshit propaganda around me. That America is falling into the pattern of all other failed civilizations as he saw it, that our elites are worshiping themselves and past glories as opposed to focusing on problem solving, existential crises. And so we will fail if they lead us to disaster, to the suicidal path, or we will be saved through a creative minority. But that's how he looks at all these civilizations, and he notices that there's these elites, there's a small group of people who take the leadership role in society, and ours is failing us, this bureaucratic elite. And maybe you can augment this with like anarchist libertarian theory, that maybe we can tone down the bureaucracies, have more horizontals and more direct democracy or self-governance, or just management without ossified systems of control. But regardless of how much democracy we can put directly into people's hands, just our civilization as a whole is facing existential problems with pollution, with war, with nuclear weapons, with the terrorism. One person can veto society. It's like one person with a dirty bomb, one person with enough ammo. That is the zombie myth. You can't dominate everyone through coercion, because it just takes one person to slip through the cracks and they could cause a lot of damage. So every culture has a zombie myth, a vampire myth, a monster, something that turns on humans that used to be human itself, or a pseudo-human, a golem. It's because that's what happens when you don't have a cohesive society. If we don't work everyone into a collective narrative, the ones that are left out can do a lot of damage. And that's the main reason for having a holistic society. You can say it's more efficient too and everything else, but we just can't afford to have such blind spots, because those blind spots can start toting the assault rifles. That kid in Thousand Oaks said, and they'll keep asking, why does this keep happening? He said that on social media while he was killing people. He stopped to make fun of people spinning their wheels, because if he doesn't have the social criticism that I do, he at least has the cynicism to not buy into. He thinks it's ridiculous, basically. His words sounded like he was ridiculing our constant response. And why I don't agree with the violence, but I too think that our reactions to the mass shootings are ridiculous. I'm trying to figure out a way to think of a structure of saying this where I can just say we need a higher level, like a response to the mass shootings. We could keep the names of the perpetrators out of the news, and we can be more aware and more inclusive of people, so that way these lone wolves don't feel like this is their only option, and give them more outlets for expressing themselves, not just through the arts, but politically. If you give people more political outlets to express themselves instead of this two-party duopoly, no matter what this is a suicide and this is a veto against society. So if we take the inputs towards suicide and then his complaints against society, if we allow him to express those, no one wants to kill themselves. And if they did, they would do it on their own. It takes a lot of effort to do shit like that. And people are inherently, it's not that they're lazy, but that's uphill resistance. There has to be stuff pushing you up that hill. And yeah, you can make it, that's like, I guess, a Tao Zen approach. Make it easier to do other things other than kill your fellow countrymen. And I feel like the propaganda, top-down bullshit narratives feeds into this, because we don't have a real human society. We have an American society basically built to support these lies. And then we have very few people trying to expose the lies. And now we have William Blum, who's done this all his life, talking to this guy at the Washington Post, who is in his 30s. He's around my age. That's why I took an interest in this little dialogue recently. Michael Birnbaum, Brussels. He's the Brussels bureau chief covering Europe. He was educated at Yale University, BA in history. So he had a BA in history, and he was talking that bullshit. He previously served as a bureau chief in Moscow and Berlin. He was an education reporter. He's covered the conflict in Ukraine, Egyptian revolution, the fall of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, Arab Spring elsewhere in the Middle East. He also worked for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He has a degree in German history from Yale University. He speaks French, German, some Russian, some Latvian. This is a very educated person, and he went to Yale University, but his view of the world is so narrow that he can't help but, like, he cannot question the American empire. That's the and then now he's bashing Trump, and that's really tough when you get into this, because Blum might be wrong and there might be collusion. It seems like right now, November 13th or November 30th, 2018, that Mueller's leaking some pretty damning stuff to the press. It seems like that Trump or a lot of his team is going to jail. That these are some serious crimes. But Blum is trying to maintain that objective view that, remember who we're talking about, the United States government and the FBI. There might be geopolitical reasons why this is all happening. And let's not get confused in all the smoke for how much fire there actually is. It's like Bill Clinton got his dick sucked, but the impeachment was over the cover-up, over the lying. The same with the cover-up is always the crime. So what is the collusion? I guess they're charging Trump with, it's not like he brainstormed hacking the DNC emails, but maybe the Russians hacked him just to influence the elections and then started talking to Trump, and Trump shouldn't have talked to a foreign power while he was running for president to try to get their support. So that's pretty clear cut. And then he lied about it. Now this is all snowballing. But to put in the context of the larger American empire, there's so much other shit going on. I knew that, I could see that back in 2016 and 17, that this was all just going to be a huge distraction, because yeah, we would rather talk about anything and fill up the news cycle with anything other than the dissolution of the American empire, the poison pill that we're being forced to swallow that I almost had to die for. And then that's what I really love about this one, Blum versus Obama. It's like, why even talk about Barack Obama? It's because these people have no ability to be self-aware or no desire to. They probably have the ability, they're smart people. But you hear how he talks. I cut it to make him say what I wanted him to say. But his speech is a lot worse if you just leave it unedited. He goes to the CIA, and his grandfather worked for the CIA. That's another big red flag about our elites, our bureaucratic elites getting smaller and smaller. Almost every president going back to, like 20, 30 years, 28 years I think I had it, have been involved with the CIA. George Bush Sr. was the director. Bill Clinton, what was it? Bill Clinton, Mena, Arkansas. They were running drugs through Mena, Arkansas while he was a governor. Mena, Arkansas, Bill Clinton, CIA. This is why you have to get rid of the internet. It's too easy to look up stuff. By Mena. Mena, Arkansas. I misspelled it. A number of allegations have been written about several local, state, and federal investigations taking place regarding to the alleged use of the Mena Intermountain Municipal Airport as a CIA drop point in a large-scale cocaine trafficking beginning in the early 1980s. Some conspiracy theories regarding the airport extend to allegedly the involvement of figures such as Ollie North, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton. And now they bring up the conspiracy theory. So conspiracy theory term CIA. Conspiracy theory. Here, wait up a sec. A CIA, this is a document, so this isn't a theory, this is documented fact. Weaponizing the term conspiracy theory, disinformation agents on the CIA. Conspiracy theory is a term that strikes fear and anxiety in the hearts of most public figures. particularly journalists and academics. Since the 1960s, the label has become a disciplinary device that has been overwhelmingly effective in defining certain events as off limits to inquiry or debate, especially in the United States, raising legitimate questions about dubious official narratives destined to inform public opinion and therefore public policy is a major thought crime that must be cauterized from the public psyche at all costs. CIA document 1035-960 played a definitive role in making the conspiracy theory term a weapon to be wielded against almost any individual or group, calling the government's increasing clandestine programs and activities into question. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. That's William Casey, Ronald Reagan's first CIA director. That was in 1981. So this is a historic record. These aren't conspiracies. Now we're just trying to fit documented what people said into what's playing out. Ronald Reagan worked in propaganda during World War II. He was a propagandist in the movies in Hollywood. So I believe that Barack Obama is along the same veins. And this whole, this one is really good, William Blum and Barack, because I feel like it really captures that dichotomy. And then I haven't even talked about Helen Thomas. Helen Thomas, when they're talking about right now how Trump is bad against the media, Barack Obama was one of the worst presidents with the media, really controlling access because he was controlling the narrative, because he's pretty much the propagandist in chief. He won that advertising award for his campaign. Really good at constructing a narrative. He hired Ben Rhodes, the wannabe fiction writer, who's a blue blood from some nice elite family like a DuPont or something like that, to come in with. That's why they need these inside people from good lineages and families, like Barack Obama's a third cousin of Dick Cheney or something. It's a very small social circle which is allowed into the higher levels of bureaucracy, unless you've really been vetted, unless you really show that you're thinking, you don't have any conspiracy theories, any bad thoughts. It's a cult. It displays a lot of the characteristics of a cult, and looking at it from the outside, trying to be objective, makes you feel like you're taking drugs when you're like, wait, what is true? Am I being too harsh? Am I being objective? Because an honest, sincere person will want to be objective. So I feel like at this time when I was making these, I made these as like truth pills, just to remind myself what objective reality is, or at least to put enough questions in my head so when I start looking at Joe Biden and Barack Obama's the bro memes or whatever, and I think, those are pretty cool guys. Why do I dislike this person so much? And I forget. It's everyone can be indoctrinated. No matter how much, just like they say, everyone can be hypnotized. No matter how much you believe, no, it won't be me. If you listen to something over and over again, so 5 or 6 years, that's why I went off on that Reddit tangent. 5 or 6 years making money, not thinking about politics too much, reading the New York Times. Every day I was reading the New York Times in 2017. I got a subscription. Finally, I had some money, and I had a schedule in my own life, and I could go down to the local coffee shop. I had a pretty good fucking life. Wake up, smoke a joint, read my fucking paper, and have my breakfast. It was fucking girlfriend, parties, hooking up with my clients. And I started to be like, why do I have so much animosity towards Barack Obama? And then at the end of 2017, I started looking at this stuff, and I saved little pieces of what I believe are objective parts of reality. Now I'm trying to put them back together. And this whole year has been a healing process. And so Helen Thomas was a really badass reporter, 1920 to 2013. Then she died, and that was her voice at the end. And she put it better than anyone else can. She had the longest chair in the DC press corps, so no one could get rid of her. Barack would have loved to get rid of her, but would have been bad optics. And that's why she was grilling his press secretary. She was saying, what's the motivation? You never tell us the motivation. And they're like, Al Qaeda, this or that. That's why you have to put these culture wars at the feet of Barack Obama as well as George Bush. The Republicans and George Bush Jr.'s type do it very crudely with Christians versus Muslims. But Barack did it a lot higher level, and which one is worse? The person who instigates the fight and the culture war based off of your baser instincts, or the one as smart as Barack Obama who just, listen to that guy and how he talks. It's Al-Qaeda has perverted the Islam, and it's two different types of enemies, but they're both equally malicious, and they're both equally dangerous. They're both suicidal. And that's treading that line without siding too much with one or the other, but trying to be objective, is really tough. They got us coming and going. And I keep trying to do it, but it feels like you're fucking tripping sometimes. Like, what the fuck is real? So, well, it's interesting. I hope Blum is better.